So good day guys, I'm Beb. So this is the chapter 8, and in the chapter 8 we have the communicative competence, and what I'm going to discuss to you is all about the nonverbal communication, which includes the proxemics, the artifacts, the kinesthetics, and then the olfactory dimensions, and then the CLT, or the communicative learning, language teaching, or should I say, and the task-based teaching. But first, we have to know the difference between the verbal communication and then the nonverbal communication. So when we talk about the verbal communication, it is the use of words to convey a message. So some forms of verbal communication are written and oral. And when we talk about the nonverbal communication, it is the use of body language to convey a message. So, the nonverbal communication, what are the types of nonverbal communication? So, nonverbal communication, it includes the facial expressions, the gestures, the paralinguistics such as the loudness of tone of voice, the body language, the proxemics or personal space, eye gaze, the haptics or the touch, the appearance, and then the artifacts. So, some of you may think, what is the importance of the nonverbal communication? So, nonverbal communication plays a significant role in our lives. So, as it can improve a person's ability to relate, to engage, and establish a meaningful interactions in everyday life. So, a better understanding of this type of communication may lead people to develop a stronger relationship with others. So, since my report is all about the nonverbal communication, I encourage everyone to please listen as much as possible. We can use our eyes, our ears, and our mind to focus so that we could understand the lesson or the topic that I'm going to discuss right now. So, artifacts. The nonverbal messages of artifacts such as clothing and ornamentation are also important aspects of communication. So, clothes often signal a person's sense of self-esteem, socioeconomic class, and general character. So, sometimes, jewelry also conveys certain messages. In a multicultural conversation group such as artifacts, along with other nonverbal signals, can be a significant factor in lifting barriers, identifying certain personality characters, and setting a general mood. So next is the kinesthetics. Touching sometimes referred to as kinesthetics. In other culturally loaded aspect of nonverbal communication, how we touch others and where we touch them is sometimes the most misunderstood aspect of nonverbal communication. Touching in some cultures signals a very personal or intimate style, while in other cultures, extensive touching is commonplace. Knowing the limits and convention is important for clear and ambiguous communication. So, for example, here in the Philippines, if you are a boy and you were about to touch a girl, it's strictly prohibited because practically saying, boys are not allowed to touch girls. So, olfactory dimensions also receive sensory nonverbal messages. So, the olfactory modality is, of course, an important one of the animal kingdom, but for the human race, two different. Cultures has established different dimensions of olfactory communication. The 20th century has created in the most technological societies a penchant for perfumes, lotions, creams, and powders are acceptable and even necessary. Natural human odors, especially perspiration, are thought to be undesirable. In some societies, of course, the smell of human perspiration is quite acceptable and even attractive. Second language and especially second cultural learners need to be aware of the accepted mores of other cultures in the olfactory modality. So, in the classroom connections, research findings that the common observations and research both point that the nonverbal communication is an extremely important, if not crucial, aspect of face-to-face communication. So again, Edward Hall in 1966 and Julius Fast in 1970 and Noreen Dresser in 1966 all bear testimony is to this crucial component of communication. So, in the teaching implications, to what extent have you been specifically taught nonverbal language such as gestures, eye contact, and proxemics? Many language courses fail to attend to this significant mode of communication, under the mistaken assumption that verbal forms, sounds, words, phrases, and sentences are sufficient for a learner to cope in a foreign language. Which nonverbal aspects would you teach and how would you teach them? So think carefully. In the classroom, we have the communicative language teaching and the task-based teaching. So as the field of second language pedagogy has developed and matured over the past few decades, we have experienced a number of reactions and counter-reactions in methods and approaches to language teaching. We can talk back over a community of foreign language teaching and observe the trends as they came and went. How we'll look back 100 years from now and characterize their present era. So, in the communicative language teaching, the answer may lie in our recent efforts to engage in communicative language teaching, or the code CLT. So, the push toward communication, Higgs and Clifford in 1982, has been relentless. Researchers have defined and redefined the construct of communicative competence, Savigon 2005. They have explored the myriad function of language that learners must be able to accomplish. They have described spoken and written discourse and pragmatic conventions. They have examined the nature or styles of nonverbal communication. With this storehouse of knowledge, we have violently pursued the goal of learning how best to teach communication. One glance at current journals in second language teaching reveals quite an array of material on CTL, or the CLT. Numerous textbooks for teachers and teacher trainers expound on the nature of communicative approaches and other techniques for varying ages and purposes. In short, wherever you look in the literature today, you will find reference in the communicative nature of language classes. So, CLT is best understood as an approach rather than a method. It is said by Richard and Rogers in 2001. It is therefore a unified but lowly based theoretical position about the nature of language and of language learning and teaching. It is nevertheless difficult to synthesize all the various definitions that have been offered from the earlier seminal works of CLT, Savignon 1983, Breen and Candlin in 1980, Widdowson 1985 before era, up to more recent work, again Savignon 2005, Ellis in 2005, Noonan in 2004, Brown in 2001. We have definitions enough to send us reeling. For the sake of simplicity and directness, I offer the following 4 interconnected characteristics as definition of CLT. So first, take note of this. Classroom goals are focused on all the components of CC and not restricted to grammatical or linguistic competence. Number 2, language techniques are designed to engage learners in the pragmatic, authentic, functional use of language for meaningful purposes. Organizational language forms are not central focus, but rather aspects of language that forms are not central focus that enable the learner to accomplish those purposes. So the number 3, fluency and accuracy are seen to complementary principles underlying communicative techniques. At times, fluency may have to take on more importance than accuracy in order to keep learners meaningfully engaged in language use. In the communicative classroom, students ultimately have to use the language productively and receptively in unrehearsed context. So these 4 characteristics underscore some major departures from earlier approaches. In some ways, those departures were a gradual So, the last one is the task-based instruction. Among recent manifestations of CTL or the CLT, task-based instruction has emerged as major focal point of language teaching practice worldwide. So, Illis 2005, Noonan 2004, Skehan 2003, Bygate, Skehan, and Swain 2001, Willis 1996. As the profession has continued to emphasize classroom interaction, learner-centered teaching authenticity, and viewing of learners' own experiences as important contributors to learning, task-based instruction draws the attention of teachers and learners to the task in the classroom. Skehan 2003 defines a task as simply an activity which requires learners to use language with emphasis on meaning to attain an objective, but this leaves a great deal of room for interpretation, so perhaps a task is better understood in Skehan's 1988. A task in an activity which meaning is primary, there is a problem to solve in relationship to real-world activity, with an objective that can be assessed in terms of an outcome. So David Noonan in 2004, among others, Skehan 2003, Willis 1996 is careful to distinguish between target task, it is the use of language in the world beyond the classroom, and pedagogical task, it is the occur in the classroom. Tasks are subset of all the technique and activities that might design for the classroom and themselves might involve several techniques. So for example, a map-oriented problem-solving task involve a teacher-initiated schema, setting comments as a review of appropriate grammar and the vocabulary useful for the task, pair of group work to propose and discuss solutions, and the whole class reporting procedure. So all of these are communicative and part of the nature of the communicative language teaching. But the task itself is designed to equip learners with the communicative language needed to give someone directions. The particular task may be described as pedagogical task with a relationship to real-world situations. Task-based instruction is an approach that urges teachers in their lessons and curriculum designs to focus on many and communicative factors discussed in this chapter. In order to accomplish a task, a learner needs to have a sufficient organizational competence, elocutionary competence to convey intended meaning, strategic competence to compensate for unforeseen difficulties, and then all the tools, discourse, pragmatics, and even nonverbal communicative ability. So, communicative language teaching, the primary goal of this is to help students communicate effectively in their target language. At first, the emphasis is on students conveying an authentic message in their own context and being understood by the listeners they are trying to reach. While accuracy is critical, it does not have the primary goal. So that's the end of my report, guys. I hope that you learned a lot. Thank you.